The world powers are holding some pretty high-stake diplomacy talks to try and secure a ceasefire deal in the Gaza Strip. Amid the hope of a truce, however, the Israeli army has continued to bomb the Gaza Strip. So on the one hand, the Israelis are talking and negotiating for a ceasefire deal and a negotiation to secure the release of hostages. At the same time, they've continued with their campaign of bombing the Gaza Strip. Now, according to a Palestinian news agency, in the latest Israeli strike, at least about 15 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza town of Zayavad. The strike, in fact, took place after the Israelis issued yet another evacuation order, citing Hamas rocket fire from nearby. The Israeli military spokesperson has posted instructions on the social media platform X for people in parts of central Gaza to evacuate to a designated humanitarian zone, though the Israeli military is also saying that it is looking into the killing of the 15 people that took place during its operation. UNRWA has released a statement saying that the so-called humanitarian zone in the Gaza Strip has now shrunk to just 11% of Gaza's territory, which has led to complete chaos and fear amongst the displaced. The Palestinian media says that Israeli forces in the last 48 hours have committed at least 5 massacres against families, and some victims are still underneath the rubble. Meanwhile, the United States has warned Iran would face cataclysmic consequences if it strikes Israel, since the latest round of Gaza ceasefire talks in Doha ended without a breakthrough. Negotiators will again meet next week in an attempt to try and end the war. A senior U.S. official has said that Iran would derail the momentum towards a Gaza truce deal if it strikes Israel in response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. The American President Joe Biden has warned all sides not to undermine the efforts for a potential ceasefire deal. The Biden has said that a deal is in fact nearing, even though it's not there yet. Listen to the American president.
I'll say one thing about one of the reasons why I was late for y'all was I was dealing with the ceasefire effort in the Middle East. And we are closer than we've ever been. I don't want to jinx anything, but as my grandfather said, with the grace of God, good little neighbors, a lot of luck. We may have something, but we're not there yet. It was much, much closer than it was 3 days ago. So, 2 years ago. Thank you.
We're much, much closer, but we're not there yet. That is what the American president has to say. Now, in a joint statement, the United States, Qatar and Egypt have said that Washington has presented a new proposal for the deal. The statement further adds that the new proposal was built on the points of agreement over the past week, closing gaps between the sides in a way that could allow for rapid implementation of a deal. However, Hamas has accused Washington of just trying to create a false atmosphere without any genuine intention of stopping the war. Now, Hamas has in fact dismissed Biden's optimism for a truce. A Hamas official has said, and I quote, "To say that we are anywhere close to a deal is an illusion." Expectations were low for this round of ceasefire talks, which began on Thursday, and Hamas, which did not participate directly in the talks, has accused the state of Israel of adding more demands to a previous proposal that had the American and international support. Now, both sides have agreed in principle to a plan that President Biden had announced in the month of May, but Hamas has proposed amendments and Israel has suggested clarifications, leading each side to accuse the other of trying to undermine the chances of a potential deal. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is happening at this moment over the course of these negotiations, we're being joined by Professor James Russell, who's an associate professor in the Department of National Security Affairs at NPS from Monterey in the United States, and he's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor Russell, we're hearing a lot about these negotiations that are taking place of a potential ceasefire deal. We've been hearing about these negotiations that have been ongoing for so long. Now, why do you think there has been no deal that has been reached for a ceasefire and for the exchange of hostages and prisoners in the Gaza Strip for the last several months?
Well, my answer to that is simple, is that the incentives in place for the participants to conclude such a deal simply don't exist. Israel has been conducting a genocidal war of ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians. It sees no reason to try to stop this campaign. Their objective is to drive the Palestinians off the Gaza Strip and colonize it. They also seek to widen the regional war. by their provocations against Iran. And what they really seek, of course, is to draw in the United States. So for Israelis, they have every incentive to want to try to continue the war. And for Hamas, it's actually curiously somewhat similar in that the reason, I think, for the attack on Israel back in October was to widen the war, so to speak, to draw international attention to the plight of the Palestinians, which has happened, of course, at great cost to the Palestinians. And so they look at the prospect of a wider regional war as something that might help their cause, right? They have been seeking, the Palestinians have been seeking for many, many years outside support for their political objectives of creating a Palestinian state. They would, I think, rather have achieved this peacefully, but the Israelis have taken that off the table. So both sides, the incentives, the only actor in this situation for restraint is the United States, and Biden has been completely and utterly ineffective throughout this crisis, and I see no reason to believe he suddenly is willing to use the leverage at his disposal.
You know, I think that's an important point that you make, because if there is any country that has any kind of leverage on what is happening at this moment in the Gaza Strip, it would be the United States of America. And what is interesting is that on Thursday, just before this round of negotiations began in Doha, we got reports that the United States of America has approved another $20 billion of weapon for the state of Israel just before the negotiations were to start in Doha. What do you think has been the American role in these negotiations and also in the course of this war?
The American role in the war is simple and straightforward. We have enabled politically, militarily, and economically the Israeli slaughter of innocent Palestinians. America has blood on its hands. I see no reason why the International Court of Justice isn't pursuing President Biden and his administration as war criminals for what we are doing. I know that's seen as a rather extreme view, but it's the truth. And as an American, it pains me to say this, right? And it's so the question you have to ask yourself is, well, why is the United States acting like this? And I think the reality is it's the power of the Israeli lobby and the intrusion of big money, donor money into American politics. You have to understand that as throughout this wartime crisis, the United States and President Biden in particular and the Democratic Party have been receiving millions of dollars from rich donors, pro-Israeli donors across the political spectrum. And they're terrified of angering the donors. And again, this is not a positive reflection on American democracy in any way, shape, or form. It's the intrusion of big money influencing political decisions. This war is not in American interests. I can tell you that. And I wish we had an American president in place who was representing American interests.
I think you've summed it up beautifully there. Thank you very much indeed, Professor James Russell, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
Thank you very much.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.